G'day mate, 40 here. So you might be asking me, 40, are there any downsides to going public with highly personal information about your life? Are there any downsides to weighing in on hot button issues like President Donald Trump's executive order banning transgender individuals from the US military? Is there any downside to publicly weighing in on that hot button issue? Is there any possible negative consequences with going public about such intimate details as your gender dysphoria and your childhood and how you were raised and your sexual feelings and your sexual identity and how you've struggled with this over the years, and then how you've begun a transition in 2023, and how people around you have been so supportive, and how you strongly disagree with the president? Are there any downsides to being so public with such private information? And the answer is yes. Do not go public with intimate information about your life if you are not at ease with people gossiping about you. Now, after the Wednesday night plane crash in Washington, D.C., so a Black Hawk helicopter appeared to me and to thousands of other people to have directly flown into the flight path of that American Airlines flight. Appeared to be an act of mass murder, an act of terror. And in a highly unusual move, the United States military is not revealing the name of the female pilot who was operating the Black Hawk helicopter that had gone on a very unusual flight path prior to the collision. It appeared to have been trying to collide with two other airplanes before finally successfully colliding with American Airlines. And at the request of her family, the US military is not releasing her name. And that's highly unusual. So you have what appears to be an act of mass murder and mass terror. And the US military, at the request of the family, is refusing to release the name of the female pilot who appears to have committed an deliberate act of mass murder and mass terror. So approximately 69 people are dead as a result of this female pilot. And the President of the United States, the most powerful person in the world, blamed the crash on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we have a story topping the news, what appears to be the mass murder of 69 people by a deliberate act of terrorism by a female pilot on a U.S. military Black Hawk. We have the President of the United States stating publicly that he believes that this was the result of diversity, equity, inclusion policies. And on the same day of this crash, you have a transgender, male to female, National Guard, Black Hawk helicopter pilot trainee based in Virginia, right, which is right next to Washington, D.C., giving very intimate details of her life, opposing Donald Trump on the hot button issue of his executive order expelling transgender members of the U.S. military, going into very intimate details of her life. And when I look through Google, I cannot find any other Black Hawk helicopter pilot trainee giving an interview to a major show. The Michael Smerconish podcast is a major show. He's a CNN host. He's on Sirius XM. He has major figures on his show. And you have a male to female transgender pilot trainee in the National Guard talking on the Smerconish show on the day of the crash, giving all sorts of details that appear to make her a plausible candidate for being the helicopter pilot who appeared to deliberately crash into the American Airlines flight. And now, 36 hours after the accident happened, and 34 hours after numerous people are asking online, is it this person who went on the Michael Smerconish podcast? So, the male to female transgender who went on the Smerconish podcast was his media manager. Right, this is someone who is digitally savvy. This appears to be an extremely online person who, for 34 hours, declined to say anything about the hundreds of people asking, was the person who appeared on the Michael Smerconish podcast the pilot? And why would people ask this question? Because the US military, in a highly unusual move, is not releasing the name of the female pilot. So in a vacuum of information, on a hot button, passionate, fascinating, frightening story, people will inevitably try to figure out for themselves what's going on. And there is only one possibility: who has sought publicity, who has sought to make the most intimate details of his life public, who has published an essay that day decrying Donald Trump's hot button executive order expelling transgender from the US military, who went on a major podcast hosted by a well-known CNN host who has major figures on his show. And you provided all sorts of details about your life, about your 500 hours of training that match with what we are told by Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, that the pilot trainee on the Black Hawk helicopter had 500 hours based in Virginia. So this is a training mission, right? And so I don't know why this person who seeks publicity one moment, the only Black Hawk helicopter pilot trainee who I can find on Google who has sought publicity. So there may well be others, but they certainly don't come to mind. Right? Please correct me where I'm wrong. Where else has a Black Hawk helicopter pilot trainee sought national publicity? Weighing in on a hot button presidential executive order. So someone who has deliberately chosen to place herself in the middle of a polarizing debate and voluntarily choosing to reveal the most intimate details of her life to try to make an ideological point against the president of the newly elected president of the United States. Right? She jumped feet first into a hot button debate, and she offered up the intimate details of her own life, many of which plausibly lined up with a possible identity for this Black Hawk helicopter. And then for approximately 34 hours after people started inquiring about her online, right? 34 hours, she waits 34 hours and then comes forward and says, no, it's not me. And this is not someone who's a hermit. This is not someone who's a shrinking violet. This is not someone who can plausibly say, don't invade my privacy, because she chose to reveal the most intimate details of her life to make an ideological point against the President of the United States in a hot button national issue of the transgender serving in the US military. So when people raise the birther conspiracy theory against Barack Obama, he could have released his birth certificate. Right? After a week of that nonsense, he could have released his birth certificate, but he chose not to. He chose to allow this debate to rage for years before he finally decided to release his birth certificate. I assume he thought that it was to his advantage, that it would be discrediting of his most fervent opponents to allow them to go on and on, raising questions about his birth certificate. So he chose to allow that torrent of misinformation to go on because he thought it was to his advantage. And then after years of that, he strategically decided, now I'm finally going to release the birth certificate. So if there is a torrent of inquiries about your whereabouts, right, hundreds, thousands of people inquiring about your whereabouts because you just went on a national major show and you release intimate details about your life, and you place yourself right in the center of a hot button public controversy about transgender serving in the military, and it just so happens that many of the details that you have released about your own life plausibly line up with the possible pilot of this helicopter who appeared to be bent on a mission of mass murder. Right? You are not morally required necessarily to go public and say this is not me, but there is a price for seeking publicity, for trying to milk the private details of your own life, the most painful, intimate details of your own story, and presenting them publicly to make a political, ideological, cultural, national, military point. Right? There are consequences for that. And if the exact same situation were to occur tonight, the exact same thing will happen, right? If people in charge will not release the name of a person who appeared to be bent on an act of mass murder and mass terrorism, and that very same day you have gone public with a riveting, intimate, like warts and all, fully disclosing painful details about your own life, and you have released that day details to the public that make you a plausible candidate, the only plausible candidate in the eyes of those who do not know, then there will be consequences. People will want to know, is this you? So, for example, if there's a news story today, there's been a news story over the past year that an actor by the name of Luke Ford in Scotland was arrested and convicted of various sex crimes. So I'm not based in Scotland, so nobody thinks it's me. But if there's a news story today that an Australian-American dual citizen who converted to Orthodox Judaism, lives in Los Angeles, and is a longtime blogger and vlogger, has done something horrible, right? I may not necessarily be legally and perhaps not even morally compelled to speak out and say this is not me, but there will be immediately hundreds of people saying, is that you, Luke Ford? And the longer I wait to say, no, it's not me, right, the more speculation will build. And so we all have a profound influence on how other people view us. If this particular transgender National Guard helicopter, Black Hawk helicopter trainee had not gone public on the Michael Smerconish show to try to take down the president, if she had not publicly tried to engage in this hot button issue, if she had chosen to not go public with the most intimate details of her life, if she had not tried to use most painful, intimate details of her life to score political points, she had not gone up against the President of the United States on an issue that divides America, if she had not sought publicity, she had not that very day, right, gone public, right, she would not have been in a national conversation. There is a downside to making the most intimate details of your life public. There is a downside to engaging in hot button issues. There is a downside for releasing details to the public that make you plausible in the eyes of thousands of people as a possible pilot who may have done something horrible, right? And you choose not to say anything because for whatever reason you want to milk possibly victimhood points of having being wrongly accused. Right? There's a price to pay. And so don't go public with the intimate details of your life if you don't want people gossiping about you. You release private details that plausibly line up with the perpetrator of some horrible terrorist attack that claimed the lives of about 70 people, then there's a price to pay. And if you don't immediately rebut these speculations, then the price that you will pay, it will rise and rise and rise and rise. And this is inevitable. This is not going to change. There is no solution. Right? In no world will the perpetrator of some horrible mass casualty, mass terror event whose name is withheld from the public, in no world will there fail to be speculation about the identity of that person. And if you have gone public to promote your cause and to promote yourself, and if you have tried to use the most painful details of your life to score political points, and you have chosen to release details that then plausibly line up with the possible perpetrator of a mass casualty terror event, or what appears that way, then there's a price to pay. So don't go public on hot button issues. Don't go public on anything if you are not okay with people gossiping about you. If you're not okay with people speculating about you, don't go public. Don't appear on national shows. Don't publish essays revealing the most painful, intimate details of your life to try to score political points. There is a price to be paid for engaging in hot button activism. Right? For every public action, there is a reaction. I suspect for every private action, there is a reaction as well. So I have no desire to add to the pain of this particular person. I suspect she now regrets her decision to go public. But this will not change. The facts will not change. Right? If people in charge do not give us the identity of someone who appears to have committed some terror attack that took the lives of 69 people, and you have publicly retailed information that makes you the most plausible or the most likely candidate, don't be surprised when people ask, was this you? And last night, I noticed for more than 21 hours before I ever mentioned this topic, people had been posting publicly, socially, on X, on Facebook, on other platforms for more than 21 hours. People had been asking, hey, this person who the very day of the crash sought national publicity on a hot button issue and details of her life make her a plausible candidate to be the pilot of this Black Hawk helicopter. Right, 21 hours went by for someone who was the media manager for the Smokeonish show, and she chooses not to respond and even waits a day and a half to respond to thousands of people inquiring, is this you? After you created the attention seeking in the first place. Right. Then you bear substantial responsibility for your own misery, and other people would do well to consider, do I want to pay this type of price? And now that we know that she was not apparently the pilot, then people should stop using her name in connection with Black Hawk. And as soon as I saw that information this morning, I unretweeted any tweets that I had seen, that I tweeted, asking if this was the person who got on Smokeonish, was this the person on the podcast. I deleted my show where a section of it was asking, is this the identity of the pilot? But I cut out and have kept up many videos asking questions about this crash, because it appears to me as a total amateur This was an deliberate act of mass murder, mass terror. And we need to know who was piloting that Black Hawk helicopter. And there are consequences for your behavior, right? If you are so shoddy or so evil to have been piloting this helicopter, then that will have negative consequences for your family. Where is your remorse, Luke? Is that not an article of your faith? I have no remorse, but I am open to the criticism. That's why, Team Blair, I'm not blocking you, I'm not deleting you, I make you a moderator. Right? Criticism makes me better. At this point in time, unless I see something that I wrote or said that was ill-considered, there is no way to avoid asking these questions if this event happens tonight, right? Someone chooses to make themselves a public figure on a hot button issue, lines themselves up by releasing private details that make them a plausible candidate, the only plausible candidate. There will inevitably be questions. And if you do not act quickly to respond to those questions, that speculation will only grow. There will never be a world where you appear to have an act of mass terrorism with scores of casualties, where people will just be at ease with not knowing who perpetrated what appears to be an act of mass terror. So, there we go. You are projecting the price paid will be yours and loss of reputation. Fine. This is a man standing in a dingy closet with bits of string connecting disparate details, blaming the newspaper he clipped the details out of. Fair enough. Blaming her for your slander is ludicrous. I'm not blaming her. There's not 1 ounce of blame. She is not morally culpable, but there are consequences. All right, let's say I jump up right now, and when I come down, I break my ankle somehow. Right? I'm not to blame. It's bad luck, but it is a consequence of my choice of jumping up. She jumped up to be part of a national conversation on a highly controversial issue, and she chose to deliberately release private details of her life, and there are consequences to that. I don't blame people for going public with their private information. I go public with my private information, and there are consequences to that, right? There are downsides. There is pain. There is social ostracism. There is unfair blame, unfair finger pointing. For all I know, this particular person who was on this McConnell show Wednesday is a great American, a great human being, highly ethical, has led an upstanding life. And even righteous people, when they choose to get into the public arena and relate intimate details of their life to try to score ideological and political points, they will experience pain as a result of that. Do I blame people who choose to play football for getting CTE? I don't blame them, but it is a consequence of choosing to play football. You choose to play tackle football, you're highly likely to get CTE. You choose to play tackle football in the public arena by releasing intimate details of your life to score political points, you're highly likely to suffer severe blowback and pain. You're not to blame for playing football. You're not to blame for going public on hot button issues, but there are consequences. People will speculate about you in a way that they will not if you're just a complete private citizen. Now, Mark Halperin on the morning show today, said he had spent an hour and a half that morning trying to research who the female pilot was of the Black Hawk helicopter. And he played video that demonstrated that it appeared that the Black Hawk helicopter was deliberately engaged in an act of mass murder and mass terror. And Halperin says it's highly unusual that they have not released the name of the female pilot. And he spent 90 minutes trying to research the topic, and he noted that there was a lot of speculation online, which was inevitable because those who know the identity of the female pilot are not releasing it. And Donald Trump interjected into this conversation, talking that the crash was the result of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So given the context, right, this will repeat again and again and again. You have the United States President weighing in on a hot button controversial issue. You have what appears to be a deliberate act of mass terror. You have the president saying this act of mass terror or mass casualty event is the result of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You then have a plausible candidate who offers up details of her life and service that make him a plausible candidate. And you have someone weighing in on a national show, retailing the most intimate details of their life to try to make a moral and political and cultural and military point. How can there not be questions asked if you are the only person in this category who's plausible to the general public because you went public on a national show? They may be having a hard time making a death notification given how incompetent the new administration is. They're having no time making a death notification. The family knows they're withholding the name at the request of the family. This is highly, 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 highly unusual. The family requested that the female pilot's name not be used as a consequence of the United States military acceding to this highly unusual request and deciding not to release the name. There is frenzied speculation about who is the possible perpetrator of what appears to be a mass terror event. Mark Halperin didn't spend 90 minutes on this topic before the morning show because it's just irrelevant and just so obvious that people shouldn't speculate. Sure, Trump stoked your rush to judgment. That's something we libtards have been on about. And the helicopter pilot trainee played a role. She went on a national show the very day of the crash, and she offered up private details, geographic details, training details, history details, location details that all made her a plausible candidate on the very day of the crash. And then he chooses to wait 36 hours to make a response. So for a day and a half, people are asking, is this you? Is this you? Is this you? Is this you? And he chose not to respond. Inevitably, there will be frenzied speculation. Who reported what you're saying, that the family hushed up the notice? NPR reported this about 3 hours ago. So look at the NPR story. Just research the story. The family's been notified. The family requested that the female pilot's name not be publicly released. And this is highly, highly, highly unusual. And if you look at the video, the two new videos that Mark Halperin played on this morning's show, it looked like a deliberate act of mass terror. And so why does an experienced journalist like Mark Halperin spend 90 minutes this morning before the show trying to find out about the identity of this helicopter pilot? Because in this situation, there will be a public frenzy in any public, right, to find out the identity of someone who appeared to deliberately slaughter 67, 69 innocent people. Now, I wear a yarmulke, and there are some people who feel uncomfortable around me because I wear a yarmulke. And in my way of looking at the world, it is incumbent on me to try to do what I can to make them feel comfortable, right? I try not to carry my religion heavily. So in social gatherings, in the workplace, I don't expect other people to bend to my requirements of my religion. I don't expect a boss or a social setting to have kosher food. I don't expect them to change the date, the time of their gatherings, right? It's on me. And so sometimes people feel uncomfortable around somebody with visible handicap, or someone in a wheelchair, or someone with some kind of disability. And from my particular hero system, it is incumbent on the person who is a source of discomfort for others, or who if you are a fevered object of speculation. In my hero system, you should do everything that you can to put other people at ease. In my hero system, we should all be doing everything we can to put other people at ease. And when we allow people to feel uncomfortable, and when we allow other people to be consumed with feverish speculation about us, and we have an easy, amenable option of putting them at ease and removing their discomfort and their fevered speculation, from the perspective of my moral system, you should do all that you can. So if a Luke Ford with my details was publicly inquired about as the possible perpetrator of some horrible mass terror event, I would rush to say it's not me and provide evidence that it's not me, because I feel that I have a moral obligation to remove other people's discomfort and state of anxiety if that is possible. So if you're a Muslim and you wear dominantly, if you wear particular Muslim paraphernalia and you notice that some people feel uncomfortable, then if you have the ability to remove that discomfort, you should do so. Right? If in your workplace it is widely speculated that you did something horrible, then you should tell people, no, it was not me. And if you can, provide evidence that it was not you. Mark Furman, right? The LAPD cop who was castigated as some massive racist during the trial of O.J. Simpson, was called back a second time to testify because there was evidence that made it appear the first time he testified he was lying. And so he didn't know how to handle the situation, and apparently he was getting no support from the lead prosecutors in the case. And so he hired his own attorney. He told him to take the fifth, which is highly unusual. And so when the defense asked him, did you tamper with evidence? Did you plant evidence? He said, I plead the fifth. So from my perspective, not being a lawyer, but from my perspective, that was a bad choice by Mark Furman. He should not have allowed people to speculate that he planted evidence, that he tampered with evidence, if he could easily make a strong case that he didn't. Right? To me, Mark Furman had a responsibility to confront the questions in that trial, because the guilt of O.J. Simpson was so apparent, and it was necessary for him to speak up. So, for example, Mark Furman was asked in his first line of questioning, do you use the N-word in the last 10 years? And he said no. Now, apparently Mark Furman had used the N-word while helping a friend who was a screenwriter create a dramatic cop character who used the N-word. So I could understand why Mark Furman might feel this wasn't me. I was playing a character on these tapes, trying to create a dramatic story for my friend, a screenwriter, and I was playing a racist cop character, and I was trying to juice and create excitement and drama for my friend, the screenwriter. And so I did not consider that me using the N-word. Let's say that I was an actor and I was hired to play a role, and part of my role was to say the N-word, right? And this occurred 9 years ago. And then I testified that I had not used the N-word in 10 years, right? Because that here's how you right-wingers are working currently. Something bad happens. Let's blame any involved non-white cis males in the name of DEI skepticism. That's the world you're making on your side. It's a very strong criticism, Team Blair. And I don't know if it was you, but someone popped onto one of my streams a few weeks ago and says, Luke, you've got certain strongly felt opinions about the world, and then you follow the news and you just look for opportunities to extol the virtue and clarity of your previously held opinions. And that's all you do. And I thought, wow, that's a really good critique. You're not uncomfortable enough, Luke. You need to start traveling with a Confederate flag on your shoulder. A man in a new yoga space might take a spot in the front row out of respect. You're currently sure that if there was a suicidal attack, it had to have been a female unnamed pilot. Why suspect the female of all people? Because, according to numerous news reports, such as from NPR, it was a female pilot who was operating the Black Hawk helicopter. That's not me. That's the mainstream news media. And when it's found to be an accident, you'll blame the woman because she's a woman. We shouldn't do that, and this is a good critique, Team Blair. I'm glad you're making it. Anti-DEI is just the new lens through which to prejudge people outside your group.